this morning. I'm like, no.
Good morning. It is Wednesday, September 6, 2023. This is a school board workshop, and the time is 10:30 a.m. There is one item on the agenda today. It's the elected superintendent salary discussion, followed by the good of the order.
Mr. Chair, based upon the topic of conversation and with advisement of legal counsel as well as the members of the board, I think it's best for me to step aside like I have in the past when these conversations have transpired. I'm lucky and proud to present Michael Ramirez, our Chief of Staff, to sit in my stead. Thank you, sir.
Thank you and understand. I'll wait for the switch here. Musical chairs. Mrs. DePay Bruno, would you like to introduce our guest speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Attorney Leonard Dietzen is joining us today. He's going to be the one leading the discussion. He's via Zoom, so we should be able to see him on the screen, and he'll be on one of the big screens as well. Attorney Dietzen has 34 years of experience representing public sector employees and represents 20 school boards for bargaining and 4 school boards as lead board attorney. He's represented both elected and appointed superintendents and has quite a bit of information that I think will be helpful to the board in your discussion today. So, Attorney Dietzen, there he is.
There he is. Please proceed.
Good morning. How are you all? Good morning. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay. I thought today we would go through some questions that board members submitted in advance that I have, and just discuss the overall change from an appointed superintendent to an elected superintendent. And then with respect to going through the draft policy that you have, I do believe you need a policy to try to address the current situation you have in your district. So at any time we have a question, or I go over a question, and if you have questions, just please stop and let's get further into the subject, because obviously this is your workshop, trying to answer questions. I've been fortunate to represent both appointed and elected. There's 38 elected, just so you know, in Florida, superintendents, and 29 appointed. There is not a great deal of information on exactly who is getting paid what with respect to precise salaries, because there's an ability of a board in the statute by majority vote to add to an elected superintendent's salary. Some have policies that specifically state that. We gave you some sample policies from a few districts. There's just a vast variety of how boards can give an elected superintendent additional pay. Appointed superintendents, there's a statute that specifically tells you what to look for, and there's a cap of how much you can pay out of state funds. But here for elected, we have a couple issues that I think we have to address in your district. The base amount, as I understand, is $178,000. I think 40 something. It's a salary that is going to present a challenge. 178,407. That's by statute, the base amount. The challenge you're going to have in your district is you currently have employees making more than that. So we're obviously going to want to put in our policy, in a board policy, I believe the appropriate thing would be the superintendent makes more than all current employees. Or he or she may not want to run for office. You'll have a management issue. It's an overall, I've never seen a superintendent make less. So we're going to have to deal with that today. Then there's a question, some people say 10% more, 15% more. It's going to be completely discretionary for the board. And then we could talk about what things to consider that the board would put in a policy. And then we also have to think about, currently, do we put the word shall in a policy or may? Because if you put shall in an elected superintendent policy, that person, he or she may not be the person you're anticipating being elected in Lee County. And I've had some superintendents, both appointed and elected, removed by the governor. I've had fired by boards. And so there's all kinds of relationships that have to be formed once a person's elected. I'm always leery of shalls, because if you guarantee something, it doesn't really matter how effective the communication between the board and the superintendent has to be. So one leverage the board has is with the ability to give additional discretionary funds. And we had some questions, is there really a cap? There really is not a cap on discretionary funds for elected superintendents. I haven't seen anyone make more than 15% of a raise. I haven't seen anything outrageous. There are some policies that say whatever the employees get, the superintendent gets. So if the employees on average get a 4% raise, the superintendent may also get a raise upon vote of the majority of the board. So those are some issues today we have to consider in having in a policy. If you don't have a policy, the statute just says the board may add to it by majority vote. And it's a may add to the adjusted gross salary. And again, the salary, when you do a comparison, you first have to start, in my opinion, you have to start with all the folks in Lee County. And almost all of your constitutional officers are at 178, 407. I have many superintendents and school boards thinking that's not necessarily fair. I know in Lee County, you have approximately a $2.4 billion budget. You'll see the supervisor of election does not have 13,000 employees like you. You really are electing a CEO of a large, probably the first or second largest employer in the county. And so looking at just what other constitutional officers make, that's a starting point. What happened, I think, 2 years ago is the governor gave sheriffs in Florida $5,000 more above all the other constitutional officers. He just added that to the population count. And I think that started school boards and superintendents looking at their policies to say, can we give our guy a raise or our superintendent a raise? And so that's what, in my experience, that's what started the discussion for several of my school boards. They weren't aware there was a statute that permitted them to give raises. So I believe that's why many school boards have not even approached this, because they weren't aware. They just thought the elected superintendent got the elected amount, just like the property appraiser, everyone else. And so there was not much discussion. So today we have, a policy and several questions, very good questions that were given to me. And we could start out with that, or if anyone has anything on what I just added, if you have any questions on that, we can go from there.
Board members, any questions on that? Or can we do comments now at this time on that, or?
Sure.
I mean, if the object is to attract a well-qualified person, the word may versus shall worries me a little bit, because when someone's running for office, they want to know everything about that office. What are the responsibilities? What are the, what are they going to get for a salary. So if we say may, the person running might end up being lower than several of our employees, and with just a base of 178, where, I mean, that's, so I would lean towards shall, but any other comments, when we do come up with a figure?
I think on that point, the shall should be the set salary, and the may shall be annually. Annually, you're going to get X percent annually. That's where I was leaning on. That's where I was leaning on this. The shall, you definitely want to know what the salary is for your elected superintendent running. But then annually, what you're going to do, I think that's where a discussion could be may versus guaranteeing, say, 3%, 8%, 5%. That's where I think there's a fair room for discussion. I agree with you. You want to know going in that's not 178,407.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Persons. Yeah, I mean, I agree that the superintendent, whoever that may be, shouldn't make less than any current employee. I agree with that part. I agree that we do need to make sure we're attracting someone to the role. But also, we do have to remember this is still an elected position, and there's still a duty of service to it. So they're going to give up some element of salary that they would either as an appointed or any kind of other private position. So I just want to make sure we remember that element of this. Thank you.
Any other comments before he moves on? Whoops. Oh.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I would totally agree with that, as well as many employees that take a job, they really don't get down to the salary. Actually, there's usually a range, and they really don't know the exact amount until the offer is extended. So that, a lot of times they've already pretty much said yes without really knowing, and accepted a position without really knowing the exact amount and what all the perks are exactly, and until the final details are unrailed, or what I'm trying to say, before it's actually really given in the contract or whatever. So I think that revealed. So I think that's important to note too, and it is a service job. Like, I know one of the superintendents doesn't even take a pay, so I don't know that the salary should be the focus. It's serving the people should be the most focus, in my opinion. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. If you would proceed on, that would be good.
Sure. There is a question of what actually is salary under the statutes, and you have to go to section 145.021 Florida statutes. That bases salary when referring to amounts payable in the schedules that all the constitutional officers get paid means the total annual compensation paid to an official as personal income. So this is not like a appointed person where you can have several add-ons. The only thing I believe the elected superintendent would get is the similar benefits your employees get, like health insurance benefits, life insurance, and other benefits they get. So salary is basically W-2 income. There's not a lot of creativity that you have currently creating separate retirement accounts. They get the Florida retirement system account. They just get, like everyone else gets, they get FRS, and they get a higher amount as an elected officer. So that's something a lot of people ask is what exactly is salary? So that's defined by law. There is not a maximum defined by law. So that's one thing I did find. Now, there was a question of, and prior to you going to appointed system, how did the elected superintendent get paid? There's not a lot of data going back to the 70s, but I think the Constitution was changed in 1968, and they left it up to the legislature to fix what I believe what was going on prior to the 70s was everyone did it differently. So they came up with the Department of the Office of Economic and Demographic Research to come and make something uniform based on population, based on a factor for all of their constitutional officers. And that would be the clerk of court, property appraisers, supervisor of elections, tax collectors, sheriffs, county commissioners, and school board members. There's a lot of statutes also saying, like we heard, that superintendents may donate their salary or not take a salary. I have had one superintendent donate most of the salary to charity. And so that becomes, just a personal thing. One of the questions a lot of the questions deal with how does the board have communication like they currently do with your superintendent that's fairly controlled. You have a contract, you have a specific evaluation, you have a board mission, and you want to make sure the superintendent's on board with that mission. It's just different with elected superintendent. My opinion, I have seen where there's great differences between an elected superintendent and the board's vision. Usually they almost always will go to master board training with the Florida School Board Association, and you see a lot of differences ironed out where there's a better form of communication. I think the best superintendents are the most informed and keep the board informed about everything as it happens live, and so there's no surprises. You cannot say, however, we're going to meet every Monday at 9:00 with an elected superintendent, unless in your board policy, that's where the incentive comes in for the extra compensation. If you had any annual extra compensation, would that be based on how well the communication is? Would it be based on operational performances, student achievement? You could put stuff in your policy to make sure the superintendent and the board are in great communication so that the mission of being a world-class education facility is met. So that's one way to do it. However, it's just a different, as you know, it's a different ballgame with respect to an elected versus appointed. Now, how to do a market analysis, that's just very, it's extremely difficult. When I get hired by school boards and come in and do an impasse. And for an impasse, we have to look at teachers' salaries, sports staff salaries for like-sized districts and then districts surrounding it. And so that's how the market analysis works for an impasse. So you look to like-sized districts, you basically only have what roughly with your FTE about 100,000, maybe Polk County. There's not many in Florida with your size. The first place, like I said, to start with your analysis is what do other folks make right in your area on elected folks or superintendents in your area. And the issue you're going to have is there are appointed ones and elected ones, and most of the elected ones are going to take just the salary. And I think, there's a stipend for a professional development program through the Association of Superintendents that the Department of Education gives them. And I think that's between $2,500 and $7,000 that they're entitled to if they complete a year-long program. I have one district that matches that. So if they complete the program, the district gives that, the Department of Education gives that amount, and then the district matches it. So there's just a wide variety of how to do this. But we have to start, I guess, the easy way to start is with a draft policy and then go from what are the various areas that an elected superintendent can and cannot do. The roles of elected superintendent are the same as your current superintendent. The statutory job is exactly the same. It's just how much leeway does the elected superintendent have with respect to budget, with respect to if there's a conflict. I get hired oftentimes if there's a conflict with the superintendent. I was hired once when a superintendent sued a school board over a policy difference, and I represented the school board. So you never know what happens in both an appointed situation and elected situation. So I've seen a lot of different scenarios. The governance issue. Some superintendents come with a strong agenda and they have their own folks they want to see in office. And this is the hardest part of a new elected superintendent coming in and wanting to make drastic changes in a highly functioning board. And so that's the hardest part for a board to get a handle of. And the board does have some say in personnel issues, but the superintendent, as you know, has a good deal of say of who to put in certain positions if they are qualified. And that's the key, if they are qualified. The board can reject positions if they are not qualified. They have good cause not to approve them. You can look to other states for superintendent salaries. I'm not sure that would be beneficial because it's just different in every state. I've seen some salary studies that a lot of times when there's a job search for a nationwide superintendent for an appointed one, you will look at similar sizes and you look at all other states and you can get some data like that. I'm not sure that would be helpful setting your salary. However, that's something this board can look at. You would have to understand the dynamics of that state versus the dynamics of Florida. And again, the only requirement to be a superintendent is they have to be a resident in the county. There's they don't have to have a PhD in education. I've had some with tremendous education experience, and I've had complete outsiders. And you never know how they do until they're in. Any questions or comments so far?
Board? Yes, Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, I have a question about someone who has left the FRS and then comes back in. It's my understanding that if you leave, you can't come back into FRS. Is that correct?
I believe you can if you drop. You just have to wait a certain period of time, and then you can come back in. Now, if they're collecting drop, if they're collecting drop, they don't start a new FRS account if they're collecting drop. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
I could clear that up. I do know they have to wait a certain amount of time if they're at 30 years. I think it's 6 months. And now for teachers, it's all the way up to they can stay on for 96 months. It's lasting forever.
30 years. And you've gone out of FRS.
Yes, you would have to collect FRS, actually collect, you can be in drop for 5 years and then 3 more years. So you still have a window. If hypothetically your current superintendent was at 30 and was at drop, and then he or she could come back in 6 months. If they're truly enter drop at year 30. And then I would have to find out, I would have to research, is it different for an elected person if you're at year 30, your collective drop and coming back? Because I know we had a state attorney in Tallahassee who left for 30 days, came back and started a whole new pension. And I think they changed the laws just for that because people were irate that he had 35 years. He left for a little while and started a whole new pension while he was collecting his pension.
Thank you. I would just appreciate if you would, update.
Yeah, I can find that out today.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions from anyone
Comments?
or comments? Yes.
My comment would be, if we're talking about the discretionary compensation policy, is that I would say they shall make the highest superadministrator salary plus a minimum of 15%. 15% representing between an elected official countywide who makes, a similar salary, the size of the population served, the size of the budget, the size of the staff. So I would put it at a minimum and then leave it discretionary above that.
Any comments? I totally agree with that. I think that's an excellent idea. Any other comments? Or Ms. Jordan?
Please. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. I definitely agree with her on that. And then I really appreciate the fact when we were speaking regarding making the policy to and add in the discretionary with making sure that we add the criteria that we believe that must be met in order for them to achieve that, because we're assuming that, we're hoping that, or anticipating, whatever word you want to use, that qualified people will be those who will be running for this office. And that is the hope, that we do have such people to do that. But I believe that we need to make sure that our policies are, and that's part of, I guess, the communication as well, making sure that, to ensure that we are being communicated to, we are working together and putting those criteria down that we believe that we should have met, that in order for them to receive more. I just really think that we need to put in writing whatever that looks like for us.
That does make sense. On your last paragraph of your draft policy, I'm reading it, at the sole discretion, the board may increase superintendent's base salary of 3%, and then you put in, right now it says based solely on student achievement and operation performance. Unfortunately, if you had that during COVID, there wasn't a lot of student achievement. It looks to me that would be the place to put what are your items that you believe will keep the communication lines open and what you're looking for. And I guess the word operational performance, you would want to flesh that out.
Okay. Ms. Patrica has joined us on Zoom. I would like to ask her if she has any comments or questions. Then I'll come to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am listening now. If you could come back to me before this portion of the meeting is over, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Giovanelli?
So I would agree with Ms. Jordan. So I think we need to flesh out the idea, the criteria, and so we attract the best candidates is what you're really trying to get to. So, and one of the things I would recommend, besides the student achievement, would be, biweekly meetings and stuff like that. And then one of the things that I was going to ask was, wouldn't we still do some kind of an evaluation to making sure that they're meeting those goals? And I mean, I know it's not going to affect, but it could affect that additional percentage that we're talking about. That's what it would affect, I would think. And so I would like to see more of that fleshed out, like he mentioned. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. As we just talked about with the attorney, one of the I guess he said levers we still have or controls is the salary. I get the 15%, but I'm not on board with that. I'd rather just see it set as shall make more than whatever the highest paid employee is in the district at the moment. I think a lot of it, you guys are mentioning we can do based on certain things, like you said, academics at that point, but I don't know. I'm not there with the 15%. I just think we need to look at it as a whole, and again, that gives us that measure still of being able to determine what we can do with the superintendent. So I think we have to be real careful how high we go with it as well. Again, as I mentioned, we're still an elected official, and there still is that duty of service. I agree that we do need someone that is fantastic to lead this district, but again, we do have to remember it's still an elected position. So I think we're boxing ourselves in by saying shall. It doesn't mean we can't put them at the 15% or something like that, but I feel as a minimum, I think that's too high.
If you wanted to address that particular concern, you could say up to 15%. That's just an idea.
I'm still concerned, and for the record, I'm not going to run for superintendent, that someone that is in the district and that is qualified would not want to take on the extra responsibility and run for this office and do the extra responsibility just so they could make $1 more than possibly they're making right now. I mean, it would just, if it's not an incentive, and I think we want people coming possibly from the district or education, even at 15%, that would be well below what the superintendent makes at this time. But I think it's enough above our highest employee that it'd be worth someone possibly looking into it. I think you may get candidates that are coming from a college area or something like this also. Professors and things in education. So I just want a nice field of candidates, and I just feel the job, in my opinion, justifies what that would bring. I think that would bring it somewhere around 230 as a starting salary, just from my calculations. Not exactly, but that's the general ballpark. And so I'm still leaning toward shall be a minimum of 15% above, and then we got discretionary from that point. But again, that's up to the board to do a consensus on that somewhere along the line. Any other comments, Ms. Morgan?
Yeah. Yes, I would add to the will increase the superintendent's base salary based on student achievement, operational performance, compliance with policy, and evaluation. Because I hope we write into policy things, our expectations with respect to communication, with respect to budget, et cetera. So we don't need to list all of that in the compensation form. Thank you.
I personally agree with all those. I think that's should be expected of all superintendents, but you got to sort of sometimes maybe hold it over their head just in case. But whether it's 15%, 10%, I don't know. I know our elected superintendent will be making less than, I'm just looking at the general area. If we went 15% and you compare it to Collier County, I think it was just 300,000, and it's a much smaller district. So it's just like in all our positions, you want to attract a good candidate. So that's I just don't want to box ourselves in too low. I mean, I don't think any of our staff would want to take a $20,000 if we went at 178, cut in pay to run for superintendent. They might, but I don't know if I would if I was a working person to do that. So anyway, that's just my opinion. So I don't know where everybody else stands with the 15% or versus up to. Yes,
Mr. Chairman,
Pay.
if we could just get clarity, because as you said, there are two directions that the board can go. One of them is a plus a minimum of 15%, and the other is up to 15%. So if I can get clarity from the board so I know how to draft the policy, please.
I would lean toward a minimum myself, but Ms. Morgan, you?
Minimum.
Ms. Lankard Fleming?
I just want to make sure that we're clear about some other things too, whenever we're looking at the may versus shall in the, I understand that we definitely need to have the shall receive X amount of dollars, but when it comes to may, I'm kind of going back and forth here, because if we want to attract a candidate that is not after the pay necessarily. That can't be their sole purpose for running for superintendent. And I think we just have to be very careful about boxing us in at any type of percent. I prefer the up to, and it doesn't have to be up to 15. Can it be up to 20? Can it be up to whatever we put in place right now, so that there's a cap on it? But that way, just like I think Mrs. Giovanelli had stated, if they are meeting the requirements of that yearly evaluation, part of those policies are communication, how many times we're meeting, are they following policy? If all of that is in the evaluation, and we don't box ourselves into this 15%, the superintendent could exceed our expectations and earn more. I just want clarity on this 15%, if I can get that.
If I could add, I just discovered something. If the current language was at 15% of the highest administrator salary, if your administrators say they get 4% raise next year, then the superintendent would get automatically 4% more. Wouldn't that be the case? I think that would be the case.
Yes. I just think we need a minimum salary clarity for any candidate that's running. I mean,
Yeah.
I would not have run for this office. I had no clue what it would be.
Right.
And I think the state statute minimum is just way too low. So I think we need to somehow set a minimum. It could either be a dollar figure, or it could be the 10 or 15% above the highest paid salary, which is where I'm at.
Through the chair to the attorney, is it possible to write in the language of no less than a 5% addition and not to exceed 20? I mean, can that be written in?
You can write it any way that the board desires to write it. So no less than 5% and no more than 20%, however the board desires. But we just need direction.
But
The overall question, I think, at the end of the meeting is, if you were going to announce you're going to run, or if you have a superstar within your district who's going to run, they would probably want to know what is the difference? What would I be making if I ran? And then what are the additional possibilities of getting a raise once I do a great job? And then how do we define what a great job is by the board? But those are questions probably you would want to answer. I don't have a vote, but I do agree the amounts for the size of your district by statute just appear to be very low.
Mr. Chairman, if I can add to
Yes.
that. I think it's important, though, that there's at least some type of base. People do understand what that base is going to be, and leave the discretion, any discretionary part, affiliated with the job performance. So that would be my recommendation to the board.
yes, the base shall be, and then the discretionary may be, and I think that's we've all sort of said that. I think the hard part here is just deciding where our base is going to start. Mr. Fisher?
My suggestion last time was to set the base right around where the state attorney and public defender, I think it's 205, if I recall, right around there. That was my suggestion, around there. 204, 205, something like that would be our base, so.
Percent more. Mr. Parsons.
That would be a... oh,
Mr.
yeah,
Chair, may
Morgan.
I?
Yes, Ms. Patrico first, then Ms. Morgan.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt. I can't see hands. So the people of Lee County voted for an elected superintendent with an understanding that there was a statutory formula that dictated salary. I am hesitant to go beyond that because that is what the people voted for. And while I understand that we are a particularly large district and that the formula might not be what we want, I think that's what the people voted for. That's one thing. Another thing is I understand Ms. Langford Fleming, what you just said, Mrs. Langford Fleming, I'm sorry, about discretion and the board and there being no minimum. I'd like, if we're going to go with an additional discretionary amount, I'd like it to be a may instead of a shall, because we don't know who's going to run. We don't know the qualifications, the experience, the education, the abilities of the person that gets the seat, and I think the board should have some discretion there. And then finally, on that last paragraph where it talks about reasons for additional increases, I'm uncomfortable with those being increases to salary because performance one year might be great and then the next year it's terrible. And we've already added to salary for something like student achievement, for example. Instead, if we were to tie it to a bonus, and I don't even know if that's permitted, but if we were to tie it to a bonus, then that would be a reason each year to try to be stellar on student achievement or on meeting with the board and communication with the board or whatever it is the board decides those factors are going to be. Those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Morgan?
Now I've forgotten what my comment was. I understand people looking at the base salary across elected officials in Lee County, but honestly, we're looking for somebody who can run a transportation system. We're looking for somebody who can run a food service. We're looking for somebody who can run a $2.4 billion budget. We're looking for somebody with educational expertise. And I'm looking, basically what we're talking about is knocking out our 3 top employees in the district with anything other than at least a minimum at 15%. I mean, and that tells you what kind of candidates we're going to get if we don't set a salary bar that is meaningful to people with experience in all of the management areas that are required in the school district. Thank you.
Yeah, $2,004, 2005 or 2004, whatever, that's only about a 2% above or less than 2% above our highest employees are making now. And boy, it's a lot more responsibility because so I just wanted to point that fact out for everybody to consider. But yeah, I was assuming that the May would be in the form of a bonus. Is that how it would be presented each year? You know, you'd have your base salary, and then each year they may get a bonus due to those discretionary things like Ms. Patrica said. That's how I was looking at it, but I'm not sure is that the way the other districts do it, that do the discretionary?
Yeah, it is. It would be your last paragraph. I wouldn't call it a bonus because the bonus technically does not go to FRS. So it'd be an increase, an additional increase to the base salary, an additional amount. Calling it a bonus like in bargaining means a one one-time non-FRS. I think you could call it maybe a stipend. You have to call it something different to make it attractive to become part of your FRS annual salary.
Well, I mean, that, whatever you want to call it, would just be for 1 year. Each year it would be,
Yeah, so that way you have the yearly, if you, the way it's written, you would have the yearly opportunity to evaluate. Currently, it says student achievement and operational performance at the board's discretion, and, you know, be by majority vote.
okay. I understand why you're calling it that, so, but that's, in essence, that's how it works. Any other comments? Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. So with the evaluation, because I definitely believe that that's something that would have to take place, are we permitted to have a force, because we would be forcing an elected official for us to evaluate them? So I don't know how that would work. If I may, through the chair to. Sure.
I have my answer. It's the same as Len's. I'll go ahead and let Attorney Dyson answer that question.
That's my one question.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to say we're going to have a meeting one-on-one and we're going to give you an evaluation like you currently do, and here's the form and we're going to go through it and you're going to be highly effective or right. You could not, for an elected person, have a formal evaluation. Now, I have seen from the dais the board being very impressed with a superintendent's performance and verbally going through areas that the district went from, say, number 10 to number 2, 10 to number 6, all the categories of amazing growth and amazing filling vacancies, checking all the boxes that you would want a superintendent to attend. And that was kind of a group assessment, but not sitting down with an evaluation, because he or she can say, I'm not meeting with you, period. That would knock away more than likely the 3%. But you're going to have a difficult time, I believe, I've never seen it, of having a sit-down formal evaluation like you do with an appointed one. It's just a different scenario. So I wouldn't hold high hopes for that. However, that being said, when there's the additional discretionary money tied to it, they would understand these are the criteria we're looking for this year. We're looking for these 6 things or 4 things or whatever your items are. And here's how you did, and here's why you're going to get X%, and here's why you're not. We don't perceive the majority of the board, and there would be a motion, a second, and then a discussion is how I've seen this happen of whether or not that last paragraph.
So my question then would be, that would be something that we then would, we would have to put it on an agenda or have it added. Well, it doesn't belong to us, it's the superintendent's agenda. So that would be another question, because we would not have any control over that. Or we would bring it up to good of the order, as like you just mentioned, a motion for us to have conversation on what we deem to be the evaluation for this individual. But we would not be able to, in advance, speak on this. So I'm not sure how that would work for us to have that conversation at the dais without even being prepared for, unless we notify ahead of time that we will be bringing that up as a motion, so at least we can start preparing that in our heads of what that conversation may be regarding the evaluation for the superintendent. So that was I just keep thinking about everything that you're saying and really trying to take it all in for that the may receive, because I think that's really important, because again, and going back to where they stated that we believe the voters voted for them based on the salary, I don't believe that the voters did vote for an elected superintendent with that, because even, speaking about it now, people are out there going, what in the world are you doing? But it's already here and we are going forward with it, but I do believe that we need to make sure that we have all of our policies in place that we need to have in order to make sure that the district will be running and operating the way it should be running.
Superintendents, in my experience, they meet with the board. They still meet with the board one-on-one. They fill them in on what's going on. They share data. Board members have their own unique perspective on their priorities and their data, and I don't have to tell you the obvious. It's an individual rapport that you each meet and discuss, and so the superintendent should not be shocked at the end of the year that he or she is doing a lousy job, because there's going to be workshops and meetings where you see graphs and charts of data flying down. Lee County's losing its foothold, or the opposite. Lee County is going up, and you're highly functioning. So it should never be a surprise because of all the workshops and all the data presented. And certain departments are curriculum's taken off, transportation's doing well, food services in the red. You'll have all that information. But how you do it is what I was talking about procedurally, how you do it. There still can be and will be one-on-one meetings of the superintendent and board meetings. Can you force them is an issue. You can't force an elected person to meet one-on-one. Now, do they always? I've never seen, unless there's a divorce, sometimes there's a divorce in the family and the dysfunctional board. And I have seen that where they refuse to talk. I have a situation right now where there's no communication and it's a very stressful situation. But that's rare. The vast majority of all the elected ones I deal with have a good rapport. They all have the same thing in mind. They want students to achieve. But again, agree with one of your board members who said you don't know what you're going to get until you get it.
Probably Bruno, you had your hand up a moment ago.
So to Ms. Jordan's question, your policy says superintendent can create the agenda with input from the chair. Chair can request something be put on, and by majority of the board members can also request that something put on. So that's an issue that can definitely come on the agenda if the board so chooses. And I think it's really important. I think Len just did an excellent job in explaining it, but the evaluation portion of it is just not something that's within the board's purview. You cannot evaluate an elected official. But as he said, you can look at the data. How are your reading levels this year? How are you doing with transportation? I mean, those data functions that will be reported to you would be the basis of your evaluation. Not evaluation, but at least an assessment as to the discretionary.
So you're saying we cannot send out our evaluation like we do now?
There's no evaluation. It's an elected official.
Just for our use?
Remember, this particular individual does not work for the school board, does not report to the school board, reports to the constituents just like you do. This is just somebody that's taken on those statutory responsibilities to be the chief executive officer of this organization.
But we evaluate. So, anyway.
You evaluate the board yourself.
Okay, Mr. Fisher.
Just going to mention what I said last time is, I mean, we can just have in policy, instead of having an evaluation review, just have an annual salary discussion as a, just as part of the policy review. And I'm just going back to Ms. Jordan's comments, kind of what I said in the beginning of what Ms. Patrica said. I mean, whether people like it or not, this is an elected position. So, I mean, whether, whatever the people spoke, and generally elected positions will have those set salaries with, it sounds like may have some caveats. I'm just want to be careful this board understands that. So I understand we want to attract the right person, but we just have to be careful on not having too many things out there. So thank you.
Ms. Patrica.
Thank you. And when the legislature came up with this formula,
they contemplated, I have to assume, they contemplated the fact that the superintendent runs a transportation department and a food service department and instructional and all of those things, and there is an increase in salary based on the number of people being served. The number of people being served also leads to an increase in the number of staff being supervised. Like, all of this was considered by the legislature in that formula. I'm not sure why we would mandate in our policy anything other than what the legislature put in place. Of course, giving the board discretion, using the word may, increase based on whatever it is the board decides at that time. I'm not going to be on that board, but I would like to give a future board maximum discretion and maximum flexibility in determining what that pay should be.
I think the legislature, there would not be a rule in there that says that we can set a higher salary. They didn't want us to do that. So, I mean, if we have that option, I think they did consider that there would be times that certain counties would be much larger, and you know, I think they just set the base, the minimum base salary. It was not the absolute base salary. So I don't think that was their intention, or they would have put that in there. Ms. Giovanelli.
Doesn't the state do increases on that timeline? I mean, the schedule that they gave us, don't they have increases? They increase just like our positions, that the money's increased. It's actually also went back down. When I first was on the board, it was a set amount, and then it decreased based on school teachers' salaries, and then it increased back. So I mean, there already is something set. So I think that I actually would agree with Ms. Patrica on it. I believe that the people their expectation is an elected position is what the other elected officials are making. I also would think that if we're going to have a meeting to discuss it, that it should be a briefing where opportunity for the public can speak, because they're the ones that actually, it's their employee, not ours. So I would be more interested in what the public would have to say and have a special meeting for that particular situation. So that would be one of the criteria that I would like to see in the policy. It would be a special meeting for that. And I don't know, it doesn't have to be a special meeting, I guess, but I think it would be easier for people to understand and make a point to attend, I think. And if they don't, then we kind of know where the people stand, my opinion. Thanks.
Any other comments? I think probably we should, at this point, should we take a consensus of whether we stay at the 178 as the salary for someone to run, and everything above that will be discretionary after we see someone who's elected? I personally don't like that. I mean, it seems like we're saying if the right person gets elected, we'll give them more money, but if the wrong person gets elected, we won't give them more money. I think the position should be set for whoever runs, and then we have a discretionary beyond that. That's my consensus, but we'll just sort of go down. Mr. Fisher, what's your?
I was saying set the minimum to be the statutory for the public defender, state attorney, 204, 205. I don't remember the exact language.
And I actually would concur and agree with that. Thank you.
Okay. Patrica?
I'm comfortable with the statutory amount, with any discretionary being may, not shall.
So you're at 178, okay.
I am good with the one that Ms. Morgan presented with the 15%.
Okay, Ms. Morgan, Ms. Flynn, didn't mean to skip you there.
That's okay. I'm comfortable with the 205, but I think the wording needs to be shall, and then discretionary may.
Okay, Ms. Morgan, you're,
Yeah, and I'm opposed to the statutory number.
okay, but versus the 204 or the 15%?
15% for me.
Okay. I'm at the 15%. That's 3 at 15% and 3 at 204. No, you're at 178, I'm sorry. How many were at 178?
3, 3, and me.
Yeah.
So I would lean, may I ask?
Yes.
Sorry, may I ask a question through the chair?
Sure. Yes, please.
Where, I missed the first part of the meeting. I apologize. I'll explain why later. Where does, beyond it being the state attorney's office, 204, 205 feels arbitrary to me. So could you explain to me how you got to that amount? Help me to understand that. Because that's the direction I lean, but I'm not sure that I can go there.
I was going by what was in statute, and I was trying to think of not necessarily responsibility, but duties, and the state attorney and public defender cover more areas, so it probably adds into that. So I figured if we were trying to find a middle ground, I mean, I would be fine with the statutory minimum as a base, but I figured, you know, we want to make sure that we can attract the right candidate, but I was looking at whatever the state numbers were at other offices, so, because I think the sheriff's at 214, I think it said, something like that. So I figured, you know, right around there. I figured, I was trying to look at what the middle would be the best for, you know, people looking at, you know, with the base versus going up. That's kind of how I looked at it, so.
So, may I?
Yes.
So would the policy tie the minimum for the superintendent's salary to another specific elected official's salary based on that formula? Is that what you envision?
I'd just say that minimum number at the moment, so whatever whatever their salary is, set it for now. I would not have it tied to whatever theirs is.
Okay.
I'm just trying to come up with a number.
Yeah, my problem is going forward, and the arbitrariness of that in a policy. I understand what you're thinking, but a board 15 years from now, what are they thinking? And where did that number come from? So if we could tie it to another elected official, then I could get on board with that. Those are my comments, thank you. So in other words, I'm leaning that way. If we're at a 3-3, I'm leaning that way.
Ms. Jordan?
So if I may as well, so 204, but you just said the sheriff is 214, but you would take the superintendent underneath of the sheriff, who is, how many employees, and what is the budget, and because his budget is the county's budget, so how do you look at, when you're looking at that, that's what I'm looking at, that how do we drop that person to the level of what you just spoke on? And in 15 years, we may be back to appointment, or in 10 years, or 4 years. So this is today and for the next 4 years.
Can I respond, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Ms. Patrica, I mean, I would be fine tying it with SAO and PD for that happenstance, but again, to Ms. Jordan, I mean, it's an elected position. I mean, granted, I agree, the job of the superintendent, we all know what this superintendent, how much time he spends and how much work he puts into it, so that's not disagreement, but again, it's elected. I mean, it's all, I mean, the budgets between the different constitutional officers and what they have in employees are all different and the same. I mean, they could make the same argument between them, so, but that's what the state set for that.
Ms. Morgan.
Ms. Morgan?
So the fact that the public voted to elect the superintendent does not speak to me that they assumed or even knew what the salary was. I really think we need to toss that out. I think people voted for an elected superintendent. I do not think for the majority of the people voting, the salary was a factor. So just throwing it out. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just, you know, the one argument that was made was you'll get someone totally unqualified running for office. And I said this county is very good about selecting well-qualified people. You know, the sheriff makes more than any other officer, to my knowledge. And I think pretty much in all the elected officials, there may be people, I don't know, the Mayor Fox makes probably more than anyone I know in city, the city manager and county manager make well over, you know, because of their, especially the county manager is probably the closest to what we do. you know, with what our superintendent does, not what we do. And we're closer to a council type thing. So I just, again, worry about getting qualified people to run and the effect that'll have on the district. And I think if we don't attract, and again, 15% above is less than we are paying now. That's the one thing to remember, no matter who gets elected there. And the discretion, even with discretionary and add-ons, it will still be lower than our overall package is at this moment. So I just worry. But we'll do what the board wants to do. It's not a vote, it's a consensus to bring it forward. We'll have to have more discussion and a vote on it at a later date with public comment. So we may get here and say we want to set it at 214, whatever the sheriff makes or whatever, and the public gets up and says we want very qualified people, and we may end up changing it at that time before voting on something different. So it doesn't really matter what we choose right now. It's got to move forward before the public. Am I correct?
Yes, so once we have a good draft of the policy, we'll bring it to a pre-brief, we'll do first reading, both of those will allow public comment during the briefing, and then of course the action meeting for the second meeting, which will again have a public hearing. Mr. Chairman, I just want to remind you that we do have an 11:30.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. So Ms. Patrica, you actually have the deciding consensus for them to work on their draft.
Like I said, I lean
Okay.
that way. I just, this is what we voted for. This is what the county voted for.
Okay.
And I'm loath to go against that.
Okay, at this time, then it looks like the consensus would be to move forward with a, I believe it was what the sheriff was making, whatever it is.
State attorney.
State attorney, or is it state attorney or the?
I had said state attorney or public
Okay.
defender, but can we also double check what that exact amount is if my memory is?
That they can do that on the draft. They're just giving them guidance there. Okay. Any more before we move to the good of the order real quickly, or then we can move on to the next meeting?
Maybe thank our guest.
I'd like to thank our speaker.
I appreciate being part of this deliberation. I know it's a difficult topic, but an important one, and I think you're doing great work. And you have a great reputation throughout the state. I can say that because I travel quite a bit. So thank you for letting me attend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
All right. Any good of the order before we move forward? Seeing none, we will adjourn at this point. The time is 11:33.